The race is a close one. Political ads are flooding the airwaves, and one such ad has stirred controversy. It shows a polling booth. A woman enters to vote. She looks at her husband nervously, then locks eyes with another woman. Both of them vote. They don't exchange any words, and finally they join their husbands. The ad doesn't really say very much, but the message is quite simple and clear. These two women cast secret votes. What's that? It's when you hide who you voted for. So the implication is that these women did not tell their husbands they voted secretly for Kamala Harris. And this did not go down well with the Trump campaign. They have slammed this advertisement. But the thing is, secret voting is not new. It's been happening for quite some time. And it's said to be quite widespread in this election. Look at this YouGov poll. 1 in 8 women say that they vote differently from their husbands, and they do it secretly. They don't tell their husbands about it. Nearly 5% women say that they refrain from voting to avoid a conflict with their husband. Which brings us to the historic gender divide in this year's election. It is shaping up to be a battle of the sexes. Donald Trump is popular among men. 53% say that they will vote for him. Kamala Harris is leading among the women voters. Nearly 54% women want her as president. So the gender gap is quite staggering. In fact, it's the largest since 1980. But what led to this wide gap? A lot of issues, perhaps none as big as abortion. For a lot of women, it is defining this election. And while some are resorting to secret voting, others are quite vocal about it. We saw this over the weekend at a women's march in Washington, D.C. Here's our report. Abortion rights. They've always been a point of contention in U.S. politics. But this year, they're at the forefront. This is the first U.S. presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade. Women in America lost their national right to abortion. They lost the right over their own bodies.
My body, my choice!
And now they're out on the streets to fight for it. For millions of voters, reproductive rights could determine the next president of the United States. And they're making themselves seen and heard. This is Washington, D.C., the national capital and the center of all the political action. This is where hundreds of women have gathered for a march to rally for abortion rights. We are in the American capital where hundreds of feminists and reproductive rights activists have gathered just days before the election. This event is strategically timed along with the nationwide Get Out the Vote efforts. It's a powerful reminder of what's at stake in this election. To understand why abortion rights are such a pivotal issue today, we need to go back in history. In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court gave a landmark ruling in a case called Roe versus Wade. It granted American women the constitutional right to abortion. But nearly 50 years later, in 2022, the Supreme Court overturned that precedent. So abortion was no longer a national right in the U.S. The power to regulate women's choices was back in the hands of individual states. Now, each state can decide whether women can abort unwanted pregnancies, at what stage, and under what conditions. Basically, access to abortion now depends on where you are in America. For example, here in Washington, D.C., abortion is allowed in all stages of pregnancy. But in Texas, it is illegal unless you are dying. So far, 17 American states have outlawed abortion. Some have very narrow exceptions. Like only in cases of rape, incest, or if a person's life is in danger. 8 other states allow limited access to the procedure. This is despite the fact that nearly 66% Americans support complete legal access to abortion.
Since 2016, we've been telling folks that this is the most consequential election of your lifetime, and each year it's been true, whether it's 2018, 2020, 2022. And more than ever in 2024, we are voting on freedom or fascism, and there's really no middle ground.
We got to stand up for democracy. We have to stand up for a woman's right to have control over her body, control over her life. Women's rights are human rights, and we were back in the hallways.
Which brings us to the presidential race. Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump. Support for abortion rights will benefit the Democrats. Harris has been quite vocal about the issue. She has vowed to protect women's rights if elected. But she was part of the administration which was in power when Roe versus Wade was overturned. Her predecessor, Joe Biden himself, has not been as vocal about the issue because of his Catholic background. So critics question if Harris will be different. Meanwhile, Donald Trump appointed the 3 Supreme Court justices who played a crucial role in overturning Roe versus Wade. He also supports the idea of US states governing abortion. Although in the last few months he seems to have softened his stance. He called himself the father of IVF, that's in vitro fertilization. He also said that he would not push for a national abortion ban as president. As activists prepare to march past the White House today, their message is clear. They're watching. They want action from the next administration, from those in power. In fact, this is more than just a march, they say. This is a demand for accountability and a call for the next government to prioritize reproductive rights. With the presidential race deadlocked, abortion rights could be the deciding factor in crucial swing states. These are the 7 states that will decide who becomes president. Many activists here fear another Trump presidency and support Kamala Harris. But this may not translate into as many votes as the Democrats had expected.
I'm terrified. I'm terrified as to what's going to happen to this country and women's rights. This is the most election in our country's history, and I think a lot of Americans don't realize that. What's at stake?
A lot has changed in the United States since 2020, but everything has changed for the women of America. Abortion rights have become one of the most polarizing issues of this election. For women under 30, it's even more important than inflation, they say. So this march, right before the US presidential election, is a reminder that the fight for these women is not just political, it's also personal. Washington is all set for a presidential battle like no other.
In less than 90 days, it's either going to be him or me sitting in the Oval Office.
Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump.
All we want is one simple thing: get out on Tuesday.
A vice president versus a former president. As we head towards election night, Vantage will be live from the heart of the action. Speaking to voters in this final stretch,
I'm still very undecided.
Very close presidential race.
Tracking the campaigns as they make the last push. From exclusive ground reports to in-depth analysis, this is your one-stop destination for the presidential race. Join us on this special edition of Vantage, live from the White House in Washington, D.C.